2 days of meetings with our Board of Governors. Bunch of issues were on the agenda. First and foremost, I think you all know at this point, because we issued a release, that the board voted to explore expansion in Las Vegas and Seattle. I'm excited about that opportunity. We've had discussions with elected officials, both in Las Vegas and Seattle and Nevada and the state of Washington. We have long histories in both of those markets, of course. We had a franchise in Seattle for over 40 years. We have a WNBA franchise in Seattle right now, and there's an enormous amount of passion for NBA basketball and WNBA basketball in that market. In Las Vegas, again, we have a WNBA team in Las Vegas, been there for several years now with great success. And I used to joke with both Mayors Goodman, Oscar and Carolyn, that it was as if we had a franchise in Las Vegas already with our summer league, given that we occupy that 2-week plus period in July. It's become a major place of operation for the league, and we've had multiple USA basketball training camps there as well. So I think two markets with deep basketball roots and deep connections to the NBA, and we're excited to begin that process. As we said in the press release, we are in the process of engaging an investment bank here in New York City called PJT. It's led by someone named Paul Taubman, who's been working with our league for decades. Actually was part of a process when we expanded to Canada roughly 30 years ago. So he's very familiar with the league, as is his organization. And as I said, I anticipate enormous interest in both those opportunities. Mark Tatum, our Chief Operating Officer and Deputy Commissioner, who's here today, gave an update to our board on ongoing discussions in terms of creating a new league in Europe. There were no votes taken on that. It was more of an update. But I think, as many of you are aware, we are out in the market right now. We have different bankers working on that opportunity. JP Morgan and another organization known as RAIN, two investment bankers who are soliciting interest. There are 12 separate markets we're looking at the moment. Over 100 organizations are currently involved in this process. And as I said, once again, there been enormous enthusiasm. We have ongoing discussions with the existing basketball infrastructure in Europe, both through our federation, FIBA, through the various country leagues, and the Euro League. And again, think that basketball globally it remains as #2 sport, maybe fastest growing sport in the world. And it seems to be, whether on the men's side or the women's side, we see tremendous interest in continuing to grow the game. So I would say virtually everything we covered at the board meeting was very positive. One topic not so positive, and that's ongoing tanking issues in the league. We had a lengthy conversation about the issue. I will say, and again, as I've said this before, this is not a new issue in this league. You could go back to the 60s when coin tosses were used to determine who got the first pick, then into the 80s when a draft lottery was created. That lottery has been modified 4 times since then. Obviously, it does not seem to be operating optimally where we are now. This may be an unusual year because of a perception of such a deep draft. I'd say that's combined with the advent of advanced analytics in all the sports, that teams are now making sort of calculations in terms of opportunities and risks and rewards, and I understand where that incentive takes our teams. This meeting was not about pointing fingers at any team in particular. Again, I understand where the incentives are. We understand why it results in certain behavior, and I will say it seemed unanimous in the room that we needed to make a change, and we needed to make a change for next season. Exactly what that change is, we're continuing to work on. No votes were taken today. I think there's also unanimous agreement that we need to make this change in advance of the draft and free agency this year, so all the teams understand the rules of the road going into next year. That means we will most likely have a special board meeting in May, in which at that point we will vote on whatever modification we come up with. We've been hard at work on this issue for several months now. That's led by Byron Spruell and Evan Wash and James Jones in the league office. Of course, we have a competition committee. They've been working on that issue with us. We've been talking separately to our general managers. I do think ultimately this is a decision that needs to be made at the ownership level. It has business implications, has basketball implications, has integrity implications for the league. So it's one that we take very seriously. And we were going to fix it, full stop. And I want to say that directly to our fans. And I recognize, too, that it puts even fans in many cases in an odd position, because it's become lore that in many corners of the league that the worst place to be is a middle-of-the-road team. I don't necessarily agree with that, but I think even teams that are trying hard to compete with the rosters they have, in many cases are being told by their fans that they're better off being bad or somehow manipulating the system to be worse than maybe they really are. And that puts enormous pressure on our teams. So, as I said, incentives need to be fixed, and we will fix them, and I'm looking forward to that. Lastly, there was a discussion around the WNBA. The NBA proper owns over 40% of the WNBA. Then when you take the various team interests that are WNBA team interests that are represented by NBA owners, probably close to 80% of the league of the WNBA is owned by NBA interests. So there's great interest in the league. People were extremely happy about the fact that the collective bargaining situation was resolved in time to save training camp and free agency and the season. We, of course, have 2 expansion teams joining us. We talked about how that process is going, the benefits to operating these 2 leagues in parallel, and that there are things that are done differently, things that are done collectively. But I think that what came out of the room was just, again, people were very pleased with where we came out on the WNBA side. And I've talked to many players directly and read the reports coming out of collective bargaining, and I'm really pleased that both sides feel that it's a fair outcome. I think that's very important when you go through a process like that. So, Tim, with that, happy to answer any questions.
We'll start in the 3rd row on the right. Tim?
Hi, Adam.
Hey, Tim.
Tim Reynolds with the AP. Good to see you, as always. On expansion, can you share if there was any concerns? I mean, you've talked about this, and it is a complicated thing, selling equity in the league. We all understand that. If there was any concern that any owners expressed, and to that end, I know it just happened, what's a logical timeline? You probably won't commit to one, I get that, but what are the logical next steps, and what's the hope as far as how long this part of the process might take?
Sure, Tim. There weren't concerns. I will say, in a way, we're in a good situation because there are some owners who felt that we just frankly don't need to expand. So they didn't necessarily see concern with going forward, but we felt we're in a very solid place with the 30-team league we have now. I think they're Seattle and Las Vegas, in terms of their history and support of NBA basketball, are unique in terms of available markets in the U.S. right now. No knock on any other markets. Those are just the markets we're focused on. So I think there was a discussion about, of course, dilution economically and dilution talent-wise. And I think there was a presentation by Paul Taubman and others at the league office about what the implications are by, if you're always a reminder when you expand, you're selling equity in the existing league. So, for example, if partners share in 1/30 of national television revenue or 1/30 of international opportunities. Now, if you expand by one team, it's 1/31st or 1/32nd with 2 teams. So there's that straight economic analysis. There's also potential dilution of talent. I mean, if your goal as an NBA owner ultimately is to win a championship, no matter how well managed your team is, if there are 2 more teams out there, number one, you're presumably going to lose some talent to those teams, but also it's harder to compete to win a championship if there's 32 teams than if there's 30. So again, I wouldn't put that in the category of concern. It more went in the category of considerations. But it's also why, just to make that distinction, we didn't announce today we are expanding. We announced that we're exploring expanding. And part of exploring expanding means, one, of course, there's the economic implications of what's the value of that franchise. Those four franchises will ultimately be determined by the market, and then the league has to make an assessment whether it's then worth it to go forward at those valuations. But I think they care a lot about who their potential partner or partners might be, and then particular situations in each market, like what arena would we play in, what are plans, are people looking at other arenas? All those things are part of the consideration set. So the discussion today and in the meetings leading up today went more to, all right, what are all the factors that we'll look at? And then ultimately, the view is you could explore expansion more softly by just having conversations, but certainly it was my view and others that we owe it to these markets to be transparent and to be more formal with our approach to that, so that everybody feels they have a fair shot. There's an investment banker, there's people at the league office working on this, and so if you are interested, and I'll say that now to people who may be listening or watching this, if you're interested, call the league office, call PJT Partners directly in New York. And just want to make sure everybody understands there's been no handshakes on the side, there's been no commitments, there's been no promises to anyone. This is a completely transparent process. Nothing is set in stone right now. You asked me another part of the question, what timeline? As I said before, our goal was in 2026 to resolve this issue one way or the other. So my timeline, we weren't so specific with the board, is that we need to know by the end of this calendar year what it is we're doing. It may not be that, every I is dotted, but that would be our goal this year.
Okay, third row, two in from the left, Simone.
Simone Sandri, Gazzetta dello Sport, on the NBA Europe front. This week from the EuroLeague leadership, it transpired not just a willingness to come to the table, but really like an opening to get a deal done with the NBA. And I wonder if you feel the same, and if the timeline stays the same with the potential start on October 27.
Yeah, I do have that similar sense from the EuroLeague. Of course, we know leadership in the EuroLeague very well. Chus Bueno used to be a colleague of mine at the NBA for many years. For those who don't know, he's the sort of recently installed new head of the EuroLeague. I think for the betterment of European basketball, the best outcome would be if we came together with the EuroLeague here, and that we came up with a systematic approach to growing the game throughout Europe. And that means complementing the country leagues, working together with the EuroLeague, and working together with our federation, FIBA.
All right, we'll go third row, two in. Maddie?
Hi, Adam. Madeline Kenny with the New York Post. Do you anticipate Kathy Engelbert to remain the WNBA commissioner beyond the 2026 season?
We haven't had those discussions yet. With the WNBA board, I would only say Kathy's done a fantastic job, since she's come to WNBA. Obviously, you could see just in the results, but I haven't had those discussions recently with Kathy, and even in terms of her future plans and how long she wants to do this. She had a storied career before she came to the WNBA as the CEO, of Deloitte. But I'd only say the results speak for themselves, and I'm very happy, and I know the ownership is very happy with where things stand in the WNBA.
Second row, two in from the right. Chris?
Commissioner, Chris Daniels from Como TV in Seattle. Good to see you again under these circumstances. We all know what happened 18 years ago, and the past is prologue to this. Since the team moved, both Amazon and Microsoft are now two of the most wealthiest companies in the country. Amazon is now a partner for you. We know about all the NBA players that have moved from Seattle. Tens of thousands of people have moved to Seattle since the franchise left. So the question is, what does the city of Seattle have to do to prove itself in this process? And do you expect multiple bidders, whether it's in Seattle or Las Vegas?
I do expect that there will be multiple bidders, and I don't think it's about anything specific that the city of Seattle needs to do. As you say, we have strong business partners there. I travel there frequently. The Storm have had great success in Seattle. It's just a wonderful market, and on top of that, enormous economic growth around technology. I think it has more to do with who comes forward as the potential owner, understanding the arena situation, understanding the economics, because putting aside what somebody is willing to pay for the franchise, we want to make sure they're in a position to be successful. And whether that means sharing a building, with the hockey team or whatever arrangement is put forward, that's what I meant before. When our team owners are, on one hand, they're compete like crazy on the court, but then they're all partners. And I think part of the issues we'll be looking at is, will we be putting a team in position to be successful in Seattle? I mean, I see no reason standing here today why that shouldn't be the case, but we're going to work through this process.
Second row on the end on the right, Joe.
Joe Freeman with the Oregonian. Might as well keep things in the Northwest here and look at the Blazers ownership situation. I know it hasn't been approved yet, but what do you think about Tom Dunnan as a prospective owner and just the long-term health of the Blazers and stability in Portland?
I'm just getting to know Tom. I've known him by reputation for a long time, not just through his ownership of the Carolina Hurricanes, but also through his other sports investments he's made. I mean, he's a go-getter. He's got a great reputation as a sort of having led a turnaround in the NHL. He certainly has enormous passion and spirit. He wants to be successful. He wants to be successful both as a businessman in Portland. He wants to be successful with the team on the floor. I also had an opportunity yesterday to meet the rest of his group, the rest of his ownership group. Similarly, you have some very successful people who are coming here. So I see no reason why he won't be successful in Portland. I think that he recognizes it's a unique opportunity. We very many different types of markets in the NBA, but when you have markets that are single sport markets, I should say we also have a WNBA team coming to Portland as well right now, and I think that makes what needs to happen in the building even that much more important, because you can have two major league basketball teams there. So of course we need a state-of-the-art arena to play in. I think there seems to be agreement. As you know, I was in market recently that the Moda Center needs an upgrade. There's been a vote already to ensure that's going to happen. I think there's some other pieces that need to come together in the market to ensure that there's long-term support. But I'm a big, fan of the market. It was nice to be there. Joe Masco, my colleague, and I were there recently, and the support has been enthusiastic. Senator Wyden has gotten very involved as well. So, we expect that there'll be a vote shortly from our board. Tom and his group were just interviewed yesterday, so that's now the additional process, but that should happen in short order. And I think Tom is anxious and ready to go and wants to build a championship franchise there.
Fourth row on the right on the end, Mick.
Hey, Adam. Mick Akers, Las Vegas Review-Journal. You mentioned some of these ownership groups, right? Magic Johnson's group reached out to me and expressed their interest in being part of that. What does having someone like Magic Johnson involved with the group add to a group's bid for an NBA team?
Yeah, Magic Johnson, of course, one of our greatest players ever, and also has had incredible success off the floor as well. So, I have a strong personal relationship with him, and he's beloved, around the league. So I know interest from Magic will be welcome by the league office. As I said, in some cases, you have people who'll be leading groups, and there's others who've indicated that they want to be parts of ownership groups. So that's what we'll now see as the process unfolds.
Third row on the end on the left, Howard.
Howard Beck from The Ringer. Hey, Adam.
Hey, Howard.
Sorry. You alluded to talent dilution earlier. I'm curious to what extent the league has already studied the potential impacts of talent dilution with regard to expansion and what those conclusions might have been, if you can share. But then more broadly, I think we all understand the financial reasons to expand. There's great incentive there. What is the basketball case for expanding, especially at a time when you are still grappling with tanking and a lot of bad teams? And expanding means, almost by definition, if we can judge by the past, adding two more bad teams. So what's the basketball case, and what does the dilution study tell you so far?
Yeah, so Howard, it's interesting when you talk about tanking. What's confusing by definition about tanking is it's unclear how bad a team really is, especially when outcomes are being controlled in a way based on incentives to finish further down the standings. And just back to the tanking discussion for a moment, one of the difficulties as we're trying to revise a new system is the team that finishes 30th that much worse than the team that finishes 28th or 26th or 24th or 22nd for that matter. I mean, it's my view that we have ample talent to field 32 competitive teams. I mean, just by one point of comparison, when we last had a two-team expansion roughly 30 years ago to Canada, 6% of the players in the NBA were international. That's now 30%. So, and as along the lines we were talking earlier about basketball in Europe and the amount of talent coming out of there, I mean, it's, out of the 30% of our players that are international, roughly half of them are from Europe, so that's 15% of our players are European, and obviously some of our very best players, and increasingly we have MVPs coming from outside the United States. So tanking is a confusing one, and it's something we study because it perverts the outcome. So it's the very essence of tanking is it's unclear what quality teams really have. So I'm not worried about the ability to have 30 competitive teams. Does it make it that much more difficult for a team to win a championship? Yes. On the other hand, as opposed to the old days in the league and going way back, one of the things we talked about is that in the first 65 years of this league, 3 teams won 60% of the championships. Now, over the last 14 years, you've had, I think, 11 different teams have won championships, and you've had 7 different teams over the last 7 years. So there's much more parity that used to exist in the league, and I think ultimately what people want, and that's why tanking is so corrosive. People want to see competition. I'm a big fan of college basketball. Like, I watch a lot of college games where there may be only 1 or 2 players on the floor that could legitimately play at the NBA level. It doesn't take away from my enjoyment of the game, or even to me the quality of the competition on the floor. And ultimately what we're selling is great competition. So it's something we're paying attention to. I think back to that question before, were there any concerns? There was not a strong concern in the room that there wasn't sufficient talent. I mean, I don't want to say that conversation is unrelated to tanking. I do think there was a sense in the room that the expansion process is multi-year. I mean, we hope to make a decision by the end of this year, but at the earliest, you'd have new teams coming in the league at the 28-29 season. But as I said, there was uniformity in the view that we must fix the tanking issue now. And so, I would just say, given the amount of growth in this game globally, you're very familiar with it. You've been covering this game for a long time. Look at whether it's the FIBA World Cup or the Olympic competition, from the old days, the quality of the teams that were competing against the United States till now. Basketball is played everywhere. There's talent everywhere. I think, in partly because of digital media, you can discover talent in ways you couldn't historically. There's hardly ever a diamond in the rough anymore. People are aware of where this talent is, regardless of where they are on the planet. So I think, especially given that we're looking at adding these teams in 28, 29, if we do move forward, I don't think there's going to be any issue about the quality of the competition.
Second row, 2 in on the left, Tim.
Hi, Adam. Tim Booth from the Seattle Times.
Hey, Tim.
Was expansion fee brought up as part of the conversation with the owners today, or an expected expansion fee? And do you believe the reports out there of something north of $7 billion and potentially up to $10 billion to be an accurate range for what the fee might end up being?
The only discussion in the room was understanding the math around dilution in terms of projections and what's the direct reduction in existing revenues to teams if we were to expand beginning in 28, 29. We did not discuss franchise value per se in these meetings. Of course, certainly with our bankers, we have a sense of where we think that value exists, but at the end of the day, the marketplace will determine that.
Over on your right, standing, Tim.
Tim Bondos from ESPN. You said earlier that you're going to fix tanking, full stop. You also mentioned in your answer about tanking earlier that you've changed the lottery rules as a league over the past 40 years several times, and we're still in the same position that we're in. You also mentioned the incentives leading teams to act in a certain way. Would you say that as you guys are discussing this over the next month before the special meeting in May to address this, that the only way to actually solve the problem actually this time will be to change the incentives to where winning is the thing that in some form is driving the lottery outcomes, or else are we going to be in a similar situation again where there's not actually a fix?
Yeah, so a few things, Tim. One is, I guess I want to be careful about what you may be suggesting or people may be hearing from me as a, quote, forever fix. The world changes, behavior changes. I don't necessarily think the changes we made over the last 40 years or so were necessarily wrong. I think in some cases they worked for a period of time. And math is math. When we make those changes and change odds, there's exactly statistically where you're going to come out. What's changed is behavior around those odds. And it may be as the value franchise has gone up, as I said, as the analytics have gotten more sophisticated, as pressure has come from fan bases to engage in behavior that even team ownership or GMs are not proud of. That's where we find ourselves. And I think in sports or in life, there's a lot that's unpredictable. Having said all that, I think you could describe changes we've made, or certainly the change we made since I've been commissioner, as a step change, an incremental change that we knew was not a dramatic change to the system. As you recall, in fact, when I first became commissioner in 2014, there was a proposal that was put forward by the league office that received a majority of votes from the teams, but did not pass because, I should mention, in order to make a change in the lottery system, it requires 3/4 of the teams. I think where the tension exists and existed back then, and the reason we didn't make the change in 2014 is there is an aspect of team building that is called a genuine rebuild, rebuild with integrity. The problem we're having these days is it's become almost impossible to distinguish between a tank and a rebuild. And Dave Weiss, who's sitting here in front of me, who's sort of been overseeing this process, yes, we find 2 teams right before All-Star, and maybe, that behavior, I think, rose to a level, and I think the teams understood, that required a response from the league office. But there's such a subtlety to this when incentives don't match, when we're now into it with coaches' decisions on lineups and when players come in and out of the game, injuries, doctors going back and forth with each other, pain levels of players, that my sense is when I say fix now, yes, we need to do something more extreme than we did with those incremental changes the last 4 times along. I should leave open the fact that, again, in a sophisticated way, talking to these incredible GMs who have such hard jobs, that a draft is one way to build a team. Of course, there's free agency. And then there's draft, and then there's trading. And there may be aspects of the CBA over time that we need to adjust as well. That's not something we can look at right now. The CBA has at least 4 more years to run, or maybe 3, then it goes longer, there's an opt-out. I'm sure the Players Association has views too on things that they'd want to do differently next time we sit down. So it may be the case that we will do some things, and then depending what happens, in a new collective bargaining agreement, as we have years to think about some potential changes, that there are different ways to build through free agency than exists now, or trade rules change. I will say I really like where the league is right now, because I'm sorry to have to talk about tanking, because it takes away from the incredible competition we're seeing from roughly 20 teams in the league right now, going into a wide open playoffs. So many different teams, many media members in this room who cover the league who are predicting outcomes. It's really exciting basketball. And what's so incredible about live sports at this level, and I think it's why not just the NBA, but we're seeing a rising tide among all premium sports, is that people have this hunger for this live, unscripted drama. Of course, the opposite of that is when there's a sense that both teams aren't out there trying to kill themselves to win a game. And so, as I said, we have to fix that problem. I guess I should just, not overstate something that you're going to be asking me a question in 5 years and say, you said this was a forever fix. If I'm the one standing at the podium, I just want to make clear that I recognize things may change. Also because there may be changes that we see through collective bargaining or other changes to the system that may impact on what we're doing now. But certainly, going into next season, the incentives will be completely different than they are now.
Fourth row in the middle, Tanya.
Hey, Adam. Tanya Gunn.
Hi, Tanya.
New York Times. There seems to be some disagreement up in Milwaukee about whether or not Giannis is healthy. And, earlier this week, the PA said he's healthy, he wants to play. Is the league investigating that situation? And if not, why not?
Prior to that press release from the Players Association, we were not aware there was an issue. We knew Giannis was injured. He was within the sort of usual period it was taking to come back from that injury. So I was a bit surprised by that press release. Yes, when our Players Association, our union, announces they see an issue, of course we'll look into it. So that's where it currently stands. But I believe they've already announced he's not playing in their game tonight, if that's true. So since that announcement came out, so I have not heard directly, certainly from Giannis, or the league hasn't heard from Giannis to say that he feels he should be on the court right now. But so that's something we will look into.
Second row on the left, Steve.
Steve Ashburner, NBA.com. In past expansions, there have occasionally been multiple markets that expressed interest and publicly vied for consideration. Were there any other markets that were considered for this round? And when and how did Las Vegas and Seattle emerge as the favorites?
Steve, you've been covering the league for a long time. When you begin your question, when in past expansions, so it's been a while, but yeah, I would only say here that, as I said earlier, there's some other amazing markets out there that could potentially support NBA basketball. The focus this time around was on these two particular markets. And again, I think because of our longtime history in Seattle, the fact that we have the Storm and the great success in Seattle, in Las Vegas, 20 years plus, Summer League there, great success with WNBA Aces in Las Vegas. That's why we were focused on these markets at this time.
Fourth row on the end of the left, Randall.
Hey, Adam. Randall Williams, Bloomberg News. A quick question on PJT. I know they were advising you all in the process leading up to, whether there was going to be a vote or not. They've formally been brought on to run this process. And then another question. We've seen a number of NBA teams go for $3, $5, $4 billion. And I wondered the math behind potentially the numbers that are floating around, $7 to $10 billion, and how you get there with, the Celtics going for 6-1 and the Lakers going for 10.
The answer to the first part of your question is yes. PJT is now being formally engaged, given that this resolution passed today. And I'm not going to speculate on prices. I mean, those are, people could look at, obviously, as you said, the Celtics sale. I don't think you mentioned the Lakers sale at $10 billion. But the market will determine the value of this team and then of these teams, and then we will decide whether that makes sense to move forward. But I anticipate there'll be a robust interest.
Last question, fourth row in the middle, Vork.
Hey, Adam. Mike Vorkanoff with The Athletic.
I know you're going by Vork now. Okay.
I didn't either. I'll take it, though. Better than other things you can say with 4 letters. I want to get an expansion question, and maybe you'll let us sneak in a 65-game rule question. But
sure.
The presumption has been you guys are going down this road with expansion, work with PJT, making this public, that expansion will happen. Is there a chance that there is no expansion, and why would that occur?
So there's absolutely a chance expansion may not happen, and that's why we were careful to say exploring the process. And it's also possible that we could expand to one market and not two, to 2 or 0 markets. That's sort of what's on the table right now. As to why it might not happen, at least standing here today, there's nothing that I see in the relatively short-term future of this league that would indicate in any way that there won't be enormous interest in those markets and that the board will continue to support moving forward. I should say, at the right time, it will require 3/4 of the owners supporting it, but we wouldn't be moving into this step. And in fairness to parties that are interested, was one of the reasons why we wanted to make this formal announcement, because wherever those values land, it's an enormous undertaking. It's generally not just a single owner. It's a group. It requires financing. It requires arena planning, et cetera. So where the uncertainty to me lies is in issues outside of the league, that there's enormous instability in the world at the moment, and we may ultimately conclude, for reasons completely out of our control, that it's not the right time to expand, that it's something that we should postpone and relook at some later time. And so that's really what our caveat is. And I'd say, again, in response to an earlier question, and not at all because there's concern about it, but I think the league is in such a strong position right now, and there's such enormous belief in the future prospects of this league, that for the 30 teams, there was nobody in the room saying, I really want to expand right now because I could really use the money. It's very much a strategic decision for this league, because as I said, you're selling equity. And part of the issue when you're selling equity is you have to make predictions about future value. And virtually everyone in the room said, I'm a buyer, I'm not a seller. And so the real reason ultimately to expand is if you see strategic benefit. And that's why we're particularly focused on Seattle and Las Vegas. I see strong strategic reasons for both those markets. Even, to the question around from Portland before, I mean, I think the Northwest United States, as Tom Dundon comes in and we get, a revamped Portland Trailblazers and an upgraded arena, I love the rivalry that we had historically with Seattle. This isn't a reason to expand, but it makes Evan Wash and our schedulers' lives easier if you have a team in Seattle along with Portland. And I think Las Vegas has very much become, the entertainment capital of the United States, and seemingly with an insatiable appetite for more sports. But again, we'll take a close look there. I mean, there's been a certain, economic factors that even have affected Las Vegas recently. So that's part of what you have to look at as well over time.
Okay, thank you. And then with the 65-game rule, the other NBPA statement yesterday was about Cade Cunningham and getting rid of the 65-game rule. Is that something that the league has thought about? Would it do that and negotiate with the Players Union about doing that before this current CBA runs out?
So in fairness to the Players Association, I would never say there's something we're not willing to talk to them about. I mean, things come up all the time on both sides. I would only say take a step back. I mean, it's only the third year now that the 65-game rule has been put in effect. And a few years ago, when I was standing in front of all of you, you weren't asking me about tanking, you were asking me about load management. And you were saying, what in the world are you guys going to do about the fact that star players aren't playing enough games? And we did a number of things, but one of the things we did in agreement with the Players Association was to put in place a 65-game rule to ensure that to be eligible, to be an MVP or all NBA or all defense, that you needed to play those 65 games. We always knew when there's a line you draw that somebody's going to fall on the other side of that line, and it may feel unfair in that particular instance. Let's see what happens at the end of this year. So, by the way, to Cade Cunningham, he's an incredible player, and I'm sorry that he's injured, and can't wait to see him back on the floor. But having said that, we also have to remember that to the extent that one player is no longer eligible, some other player will then be all NBA and will slot into that spot. So I'm not ready to standing here saying I don't think it's working. I think it is working. I think if you look, at the numbers, the pre-implementation of this rule, numbers were going in the wrong direction. I may have this a little bit off, but I think in the 3 years before we adopted this rule, almost a third of the all NBA players had not played 80% of the games. And that was a huge issue for the league. In the same way we're addressing tanking now, people said, what are you going to do about that? And so, not surprisingly, underlying thematic around tanking, it goes to player participation. Are the incentives aligned? And there was a general agreement between us and the Players Association that we needed to do something about that, and the result was to have this 65-game rule. Like, could it be 68? Could it be 62? That was the product of a negotiation. But I generally think it's worked. That, along with the player participation policy, there's not nearly as much discussion around load management as there was, in part because the teams and the players have responded. You see them on the floor now. So now we have a separate issue that we're dealing with in terms of tanking, and we'll deal with that. And I get it. It's part of my job, and there's always new issues. But I'm not ready to say, standing here today, that because there may be a sense of unfairness for one player, that means the rule doesn't work.
Thank you, Adam. Transcripts will be available on Media Central shortly. We appreciate you all for being here. Have a great day.
Thank you.